Well, welcome. I'm Chad Kreuzer. My wife is Fadia. We've been traveling, putting on seminars for about 23 years or so, 22 years, something like that now. And we've lived in different countries. We've traveled the world, and we travel most of the year. So we're traveling consistently, although we just had almost 3 weeks at home, which is very unusual for us, but that was a real blessing for us. And so we're going to be sharing, we'll be going back and forth. I'll start and then my wife will share and then I'll probably be coming back up. But tonight we're going to be talking about freedom in the frontal lobe, the frontal portion of the brain. And a little history. Now, some of you will know about this. To some, this will be new. If you've ever taken a Psychology 101 course, you probably remember, well, you know, that's been a lot of years ago for most of us, but there's a story of a man by the name of Phineas Gage. Phineas Gage was a railroad worker in the state of Vermont. And Vermont is, well, obviously much colder than a place like Tennessee, but it's also a mountainous area, so it could look quite similar other than the temperatures. And in order to lay down, his job as a foreman of a railroad crew was to lay down track in the mountains. But the trouble is you have mountains, and so you need a relatively flat or a very small grade to make a train track. And so what he would do is he'd take his men and they would drill down into the rocks and they would put something like dynamite in there. They would light the fuse and they would blow out sections of rock to lay down the track. Well, one particular day he was doing it, and as they would put the explosive charge in there, they would take about a 3-foot rod called a tamping iron. And they would use that and they would pack some sand on top of it to make some pressure. And one day as he was tamping down on that rod, somehow, some way, it exploded. And as it did, that rod that he was holding onto, the tamping iron, shot up like a missile. It hit him under his cheek, and it went right through his head and it blew out the top of his skull. And just to give you a little idea of how it was, it shot through. Now it didn't stick in his head, it actually continued like a missile and just went flying. And so he lost part of his brain. It was what we would call an accidental lobotomy. An accidental lobotomy. Now you think, oh, since this was the mid-1800s, you think, well, he probably died very rapidly. The strange thing is as soon as he was conscious, he was able to stand, he was able to walk, and he would literally run up to people and tell them, I just had a rod blow through my head. And people were like, what on earth? What happened to this guy? And just to share a little bit more about this, like we said, it was an accidental lobotomy. This is an actual picture of Phineas Gage. That's the actual rod that blew through his skull. It's kind of hard to see because it's a little dark, but he lost his left eye, and so, his eyes closed there in the picture. And, he's a sharp-looking guy, and the story goes that he was the head of a railroad crew. He was a good husband and father before the accident. He was with the workers that worked with him, since he was the foreman of the railroad crew. They really liked working with him. And he was a religious man. He was in regularly attended church. And then came that day of September 13 of 1848. And he was able to keep most of his cognition. It didn't actually totally change him in the sense of, like, you'd think, well, was he incapacitated? No, he was actually able to carry on conversations and so forth. But what ended up happening after the accident is that he would become very emotional and angry about things. And so that changed. He went from, a mild-mannered man to a man who was very emotional as his frontal lobe was damaged. He lost interest in church and spirituality. He became irreverent and prone to excessive profanity. So now he's swearing all the time. And he lost all respect for social customs. After that, he became very irresponsible. He went from a prized employee to the unemployment rolls, and he ended up forsaking his wife and family, and we're told that he joined a traveling circus. So what changed with Phineas Gage? Yes, as his frontal lobe was damaged, his character changed. His character changed. One of the most important parts of what makes a human is their frontal lobe. It's been called the citadel of the brain or citadel of the mind. It's the decision-making center. When you're trying to make a decision between good and bad, right and wrong, that decision largely is based in the frontal lobe. And scientific studies reveal that the frontal lobe is the seat of spirituality, morality, and the will. As we said, this is the decision-making center of the brain. We're going to be talking more about the frontal lobe, but one of the interesting things about it, when we look back, if you look back to actually in the Bible, to the last book of the Bible, in the book of Revelation, it says something very interesting. Now, the frontal lobe, in our illustration here, this is actually from Grey's Anatomy. This is like the 1909 version of Grey's Anatomy, and they have the brain, you know, different regions in different colors, and they put the frontal lobe as blue. And the frontal lobe is just behind the forehead, and it's roughly, we'll get to that, but roughly a third of the human brain. But Revelation chapter 21, verse 6 and 7 says, "And he said unto me, It is done. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give unto him that is athirst or thirsty of the fountain of the water of life freely. He that overcomes shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son." Now, talking about this, talking about overcoming, because overcoming, I share that I struggled about 11 years with addiction. So for years I struggled with addiction. I also struggled with depression. And then, you know, my life was changed, and I'll share a little bit more about that in a little bit, not tonight necessarily, but one of the messages that we talk about. But looking at this, in order for someone to overcome, this text talks about overcoming. It says, he that is athirst, or he that is thirsty. When someone first gets into an addiction, when I began smoking, and I'd smoke cigars or smoke cigarettes or this and that. I had a guy walk by me and he said, "Hey kid," I was a teenager at the time, and he said, "Hey kid, quit while you can." And I thought at that time, I will never get addicted to tobacco. I'll never get addicted. And obviously it got to the point where I couldn't quit, right? And but when he said it, I didn't want to quit. And nobody's going to quit something until they actually have a desire to quit, right? And that's what it says. He that is athirst, meaning the one who is going to overcome is going to be the one who has a thirst for it, a desire. And so this is one of my favorite quotations, and it's actually a summation of, I would say, most of cognitive science or brain science or your thought processes. And it's this. It's never forget that thoughts work out actions, repeated actions form habits, and habits form what? Character. Never forget that thoughts work out actions, repeated actions form habits, and habits form character. And often people have in their lives, they have characteristics that they don't like about themselves. They have something, maybe it's a bad habit or something, and they would love to change it, and so they try to change their habits. But the trouble is they end up going back to the same actions, and it's because what has not been changed? The thoughts. If the thoughts are changed, the thoughts work out the actions. So if the thoughts are changed, that will change the actions. Then over time, their habits will be changed, and ultimately their character will be changed. Does that make sense? And so I love that quotation. It's something I memorized years ago. Never forget that thoughts work out actions, repeated actions form habits, and habits form character. And this principle, though, fascinatingly enough, we actually see it back in the Bible. In Romans chapter 12, in verse 2, it says, "Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind." If you're going to be changed, that transformation is going to begin in the human mind. If our mind is not changed, our life will not be changed, right? So the mind has to be changed. And it also gives a hint at that back in Isaiah chapter 26, verse 3, where it says, "Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee." And I want to talk a little bit about things to overcome. Things to overcome. This is, number one, chronic stress. Now this may come as a surprise, but some stress is actually good for us, right? Like exercise, for instance. If you can do exercise, that puts stress on the muscles, it puts stress on the body, but that's a form of stress that is beneficial. And even some active forms of stress are beneficial. We'll talk more about that later. But chronic stress, where you're just stressed all the time, that's actually detrimental to us and can be deleterious to our health. Number two, another area to overcome would be things like anger, lack of forgiveness, or living with these judgmental, angry thoughts about other people. Number three, looking to overcome things like eating disorders or living habitually eating unhealthy food. And not just simply for avoiding a heart attack's sake, or that's important enough, but food actually can be one of the primary factors. There's several factors in things like depression, anxiety, but food is one of those factors. And so learning to eat food that would be the best for our gut and also the best for our brain. But another area to overcome is in the area of addictions to things like smoking, drinking, drugs, pornography, lust, wasting your life on television. I mean, there's some things that are fine, watching here and there, but just wasting your whole life sitting there doing that, that's another thing that can lead to depression, is, too much sitting around watching television and these kind of things, or gambling, or fill in the blank. You may have a vice or addiction that somebody else may not even think of it as an addiction, but to you, it's a bad habit that you need to overcome. And we're not asking you to come here and confess these things and tell everybody what you're struggling with. That's not what we're here for. But there's just things for you to think about for yourself. And here is a scientific study in pharmacology, biochemistry, and behavior talking about impulsivity, frontal lobes, and risk for addiction. And so looking at these things, looking at some research here, the frontal lobe is the center of what researchers call executive function. Executive function is part of your mental process that helps you control your behavior. So the frontal lobe is part of the brain that helps you control doing, like we said, right from wrong. When you're struggling to make that decision is made in part largely in the frontal lobe. And executive function is part of controlling impulses, abstract thinking, planning, focusing attention, and motivation. So this is an important part of the human brain, specifically the frontal lobe. And this is some research from Harvard on alcohol and the brain. A study of 3,376 women and men revealed that even light drinking of alcohol was associated with shrinkage or atrophy of the brain. And so this is important because we see what happened to Phineas Gage when his frontal lobe was damaged. It actually changed his character. And so to alcohol, it doesn't only affect us when we drink it. I used to be a heavy drinker. It also affects us when we're not drinking. So this is it can actually shrink your frontal lobe. And the shrinkage intensifies as more alcohol is consumed. So in other words, more alcohol, less brain. A little bit of drinking causes a little bit of shrinkage. A lot of drinking causes a lot of shrinkage. I don't even know how to say it, but basically the best thing is to have no shrinkage, right? Or as little as possible. What's that?
The Bible says to be sober-minded.
Yeah, the Bible talks about being sober-minded, right? And here's a study called Mechanisms of Neurodegeneration and Regeneration in Alcoholism. And what did they find? They found that 4 days of binge drinking can cause degeneration of the brain and also cause cognitive or mental deficits. I can testify, I remember those days. I could actually tell, even when I wasn't drunk anymore the next day, I could tell that I just was not thinking when I had been binging on alcohol. And the good news is that there is regeneration or neurogenesis, which is growth of new cells when in the hippocampus. That's a memory portion of the brain when alcohol consumption ceases. So when you stop drinking, or at least in this case, when they were stopping their alcohol consumption, there was actually regeneration of cells. The cells were beginning to grow back. That's the good news, but the bad news is that this was in rodents. And we do not know 100% if this will happen in humans, but you've kind of probably already noticed, I'm a Christian from talking about some Bible verses, and I don't believe God just made it for rats that they can, if they stop drinking, their brain can heal. I believe the same thing can happen in humans. So the longer we're away from it, the better it is for our brain. And we're going to talk about a few essentials for overcoming, and my wife is going to come. You want me to? Oh, it's still, okay. And so two essentials in overcoming. Number one is a desire to overcome. We talked about that. This can be one of the passages in the Bible that makes me think about this, there was a man, he wasn't looking to overcome an addiction or something like that, but there was a man who was paralyzed, and he was lying there by the pool of Bethesda, and Jesus said to him, "Wilt thou be made whole?" Meaning, do you desire to be healed? Right? And so it's really, do we have a desire? Do we have a desire to be whole, right? And so that's number one, and we can't force somebody to have a desire. When someone wants to live an addiction, you can't force them, but you can pray for them and you can encourage them. But number two is having an open mind. It is important. If what you've been doing has not worked for you, then it's good to have an open mind. Now, have you ever heard the saying, you don't want your mind to be so open that your brain falls out? Now, I do believe that. I do believe that. I'm not asking you to have a mind open to anything, because we do have to be discerning people. If somebody just says something so off the wall and so contrary to reason, well, it's probably not true, right? But if you haven't tried it and it doesn't sound dangerous and crazy, well, and it sounds like, oh, maybe it would have a healthful benefit and you see some evidence for it, well, maybe you should give it a try. But Fadia's going to come up now and she is going to give us a disclaimer before she goes any further.
So our disclaimer is very simple. We're not your doctors. That's it. So the reason we say that is because we're sharing some health principles here, and it's to your discretion what you want to try, but also you talk to your doctor. If you're under the care of your doctor, you talk to them about these things. So, because sometimes people try things and maybe it doesn't work for them, whatever, but you need to make sure that you're doing whatever you believe is right for you, right? All right, so let's continue. Back to the whole frontal lobe and understanding the importance of the frontal lobe, and that it's really a battle for the mind, right? It's a complete battle of the mind. And in the book of Revelation, chapter 14 and verse 1, it says, "And I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on Mount Zion, and with them 144,000 having" what? His Father's name written where? In their foreheads. And what did we just learn from Chad is in our foreheads? The frontal lobe, right? So this is an important part of the human experience, is that frontal lobe. And God understands that because he's the creator. And so he knows how important this frontal lobe is. And so what does he say he's going to put in the frontal lobes? His name. And what is name in the Bible? Character. Okay, so can you give me examples in the Bible of people whose character changed and so did their name? Paul. So what was his name before? Saul became Paul when he had a character change. Who else? Yeah, Jacob became. And then who else? Abram became Abraham, and Sarai became Sarah. But there's another one which is not in the positive, it's in the negative. Lucifer, who is the light bearer, became the adversary, Satan. Sad, isn't it? But you see this over and over. You could do a more in-depth study in terms of character itself, but just at a surface level, we can see that when people have a character change, their name changes as well. And just to let you know, you're going to get a new name in heaven, we're told. And so if you don't like your name now, just hold on. Jesus has another one for you, okay? So I had to learn to like my name because I was made fun as a child. Because it's an unusual name. I've never met a Fadia before. To this day, I've not met a Fadia. And so I didn't like it at first, and I was so mad at my parents for giving it to me. But then I learned the meaning, and it was healing to my heart. And I thought, wow, my parents were very thoughtful in how they chose my name. And it means our Redeemer. Isn't that beautiful? And so I can never forget. If somebody's teasing, they're teasing the Redeemer, right? So, all right, let's move on. But the language that my mother tongue is Aramaic. It's the language that Jesus spoke. And in Aramaic, the word for heel and Jacob are very similar. And hence why he was named Jacob, right? Because what was he doing to his brother's heel when he came out of the womb? He's grabbing it. It was a part of his character. A lot of times Middle Eastern people, they'll name their child if they see some characteristic of them. They'll name them accordingly. Or if they want to see a certain characteristic in their child, they'll name them that. So Jacob was a heel grabber. So what did he do? He tripped you up. That was a part of his character. He's a deceiver naturally. But did God leave him there? No. God wanted to change Jacob's character. And do you know what Israel means?
Overcomer.
Overcomer. He who wrestles with the Lord and overcomes. And so was it easy for Jacob's character to change? No, it takes wrestling, right? And you know what? A lot of times in that wrestling, we get depressed. We get down. But do you know that God loves the contrite heart? God loves depressed people. Yes, he does, right? He loves depressed people because it just draws near to him. Jesus knows what it's like to be depressed. He's not a stranger to it, right? He knows what it's like to be rejected and forsaken by all and feel like you're all alone. He totally understands, right? And he's an overcomer. And he wants us to be overcomers. So praise God for stories like Jacob, right? That give us courage to go forward. Because Jacob could have given up based on his feelings. Jesus could have given up based on his feelings. It didn't feel good. We're not saved by our feelings. We're saved by the precious blood of the Lamb, right? We're saved by the precious blood of the Lamb and not by our feelings. Our feelings are not an indication of where we are with Jesus. We should always remember what he did for us and that our feelings are not the basis for truth. So, with this said, we understand that the battle is raging and it's right here. It's right here. It's this whole character. And Jesus lived up to this name, didn't he? He lived up to this character. He had no flaws. So we can look to him and his life to even have an opportunity to have that character be put into our minds, right? Because what did Chad say about that sentence? How did it start? About character? Never forget that thoughts work out actions, repeated actions form habits, and habits form character. So in order for our minds to be changed, we need to look at something that will change our character, right? And God's given us this beautiful book filled with stories about the person who lived up to this character. Isn't that powerful? So as we focus on the life of Jesus and we see how he treated people, we see how he loved the drunkard, we see how he loved the prostitute, we see how he loved the broken, right? And as we behold that, we can become the same, right? We can have that love for others as Jesus loved. And as we walk on this earth, we can walk and talk as he did. And that's the promise God has given us, that he wants to put the Father's name right here so that we think and act and feel like Jesus, right? Not that we are Jesus, but we have that character, right? What a blessing. What good news. God is good. But there's frontal lobe killers, right? Because this is a battle. And so we need to find out what are these things that are killing our frontal lobe so that we don't have that connection with Jesus, that we don't have that connection with heaven. Well, there's certain drugs, whether they are illicit drugs or prescribed drugs, that actually affect the frontal lobe and make you feel kind of numb to everything. You ever felt that? Where you just don't care about anything. And that's what some of these things do. Did you know that lack of use also affects the frontal lobe? If we don't practice deciding things, right? Or grapple with difficult issues and try to figure out a solution and pray and struggle and wrestle with the Lord on these things, we can lose it. Head injuries, so we need to be careful of the activities we do. You know, today we're like adrenaline junkies, right? We love to do crazy things and not protect our heads at the same time and think that that's a virtue. And it's like, it's not a virtue to destroy the temple of God, right? And so if you're going to do these things, make sure you physically protect your head. Because I know people with frontal lobe damage due to things like this. But did you know that a lack of nutrition also affects the frontal lobe? And I think in America, this is one of our biggest problems, is we have an abundance of food, but we lack in nutrition. Nutrition that helps build our brains, nutrition that helps give us a better mood, right? So some of these things we'll talk about. But what goes on in the liver? Are we going to go through that? Maybe I'll skip this right now.
Yeah.
Sorry, because we're not doing the whole thing. So, oops, I'll go back one. This is an encouraging thing to think about. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, 19 and 20. These are promises. It says, what? Know you not that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost, which is in you, which ye have of God, and ye are not your own. For you are bought with what? A price. And what is that price? The precious blood of Jesus Christ, right? We're bought with a price. Therefore, because we've been bought with a price, glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's, right? And so this is where that desire for overcoming comes in, that we all need to ask God, even if we don't desire it, that He can give us the desire to want to overcome. You know, because someone might be discouraged, well, maybe I don't want to stop doing what I'm doing. It's like, okay, that's when we ask God to even give us the desire to want that, right? And so things like this are so important to remind us, I'm not my own. I've been bought with a major price. All heaven was poured out upon us in this great warfare, right? Our Prince came and fought on our behalf, and we're all here today because of that, and we have eternity to look forward to. So it's important to realize that our physical bodies are important, and we're connected. The body and the brain are not disconnected. You know, if they were, why would Jesus bother spending time healing people? Do you ever think about that? If it was just give your heart to Jesus and be done, and He's like, no, I've made this whole body. I know how it works optimally. And I know what will make you the happiest, right? And so if you want to be happy, there's certain principles that go along with this body. And so it's so important to look into that and understand it and know our limitations. You know, because we travel so much, we realize we have certain limitations and that we have to live by. And there's no reason to apologize for it, because it just is. Like one time we were in Hawaii on a mission trip. I know it sounds funny, a mission trip to Hawaii. Well, there's a lot of homeless people there. And so we had a clinic of doctors and nurses and health professionals that came down to do clinics, and they asked us to be the speakers for the evening programs that they had in 2 different areas. And so we were doing that. But after the whole day of activities, some of the people wanted to go and swim in the ocean with the turtles late at night. Well, what do you think we wanted to do? We wanted to go to bed. You know, those people were going to go back to Southern California and hit their 9-to-5 job. Chad and I were getting on a plane and going halfway across the world to Germany. And we had to jump up and act like we didn't just go through major time zones and start speaking again. Now, what would you do in our shoes when you're asked by people you want to go out and, you know, swim with the turtles? We had to think ahead and say, sorry guys, we seem boring, but we have limitations, we have restrictions, and we live by them, and we're okay with it. We just want you to know we'd love to be with you, but no. Isn't that okay? And we all have to come to a place where we accept our limitations. We accept our restrictions, and they'll make us happier. You know, a lot of times we think, why was so-and-so get away with doing all kinds of stuff? They never get sick. They never have this happen. They never, and I just, the smallest thing gets me. That's okay. That, you know, what's the phrase today? You do you, right? And I do me, right? And so it's the same. We all have limitations, and understanding that our bodies are temples of God is a good thing. So there's a super drink. And this drink has the power to enhance your energy. 1 glass before bed can lower your chances of a heart attack by 50%. Now you're like, what on earth is this drink? I need to know. It helps with constipation. It can help you feel less depressed. And can you guess what this drink is?
Water.
Yes, H2O, water. You can't improve on God's beverage, right? You just can't improve on God's beverage. Also, it says here, sorry. Do you have the thing on depression?
I don't think I have.
Can
it
you
in this
share it
slide.
real quick?
I'm trying to think
On
the exact
the water
amount.
and,
Yeah. So I don't remember the exact. I have the actual research on a slide, and I should know the exact numbers. But basically, what they have found that people who drink like 5 or 6 glasses of water a day, compared to those who drink like 2 or less, they're significantly happier. Significantly. So if you drink 5 to 6 glasses of water a day. And I'm not, that's a minimum, really. That's not a lot of water. I drink significantly more than that myself. But a minimum of like 6 glasses of water, you are more prone to be significantly happier. Part of it has to do with something called, I think it's called hemorrheology, which has to do with blood flow in our body, the science of blood flow. And when you don't, so for instance, if you don't drink all night, some of us have to get up at night, we drink water, so we do have some water at night, but other people, they just, sleep all night through. Now, if you sleep 8 hours or something like that, you wake up, you are partially dehydrated. I don't mean massively dehydrated, but you're partially dehydrated, and so your blood is more sluggish first thing in the morning. So the best thing you can do is to do what?
drink water.
Drink some water, and what that does is it begins to make your blood flow much easier through your body. It actually becomes less thick like oil, and it becomes more like water, obviously. I mean, just you understand the illustration, and so it makes it easier. So it's a very simple thing that can, it's not the only thing, it's not like you're going to reverse all depression through water, but that's one simple factor.
Thank you. So this is a study done by Dr. Pitts out of Ohio, and what he wanted to see was, does water consumption affect your endurance? For athletes, for anybody. And so historically, when they were trying to get up to Mount Everest, they were struggling to get up there and figure out how to get up there because one failed mission after another. And there's a few things that they learned. One of them is the altitude thing. You know, you hike higher and then you come down a little bit and sleep at that level. And then the next day, you've already hit that other elevation, so you gave yourself a little bit of that higher elevation. But another thing was they used to conserve water and not drink as much because they didn't want to pack it, they didn't want to deal with all that. But they found that the more water they drank, it helped them get to the top. So he said, man, I want to know if this is really true. So he put it to the test. And what he did was he took athletes and they were just walking on a treadmill, and he had them walk, and the first group was not given any water, and they lasted about, here we see about 2 hours, and then they hit the zone of exhaustion, and that's about 101.5 in this chart here, where you get overheated and then you feel exhausted. And usually that's what happens. If you just overdo it and you get hot, you're done until you cool off. So then the next group was water as they desired, and that's usually, oh, I feel thirsty, I need water. And that group lasted a little longer, about five and a quarter hours or something like that. So they lasted a little longer. But the next group, they were given water as they were losing it, so they were measuring everything the body was putting out and then giving it back in fluids of water. And what do you think happened with them? They kept walking and walking and walking and walking and didn't get exhausted. And so Dr. Pitts said, yes, I realize that water really is an endurance mechanism, right? And so it's your internal air conditioning for the summertime. If you're well hydrated, you can be outdoors in the hottest part of the day. I remember we lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and there would be roofers out on that hot, hot summer days. And so I asked one of the roofers, I said, how do you guys stay up there all day long? I don't get it. And he said to me, oh, it's easy. In the morning, I push my guys to drink their water all day. I'm like, drink your water, drink your water, drink. He said, I'm pushing them all day long to drink water. And he says, and that's how we make it. He said that there's just it's your internal air conditioning. You just can't beat it. So the power of water. And thinking about the brain now, if you were lacking 10% of your water content, you would be considered dehydrated. But if you lack just 2%, it can decrease your ability to think clearly and make you more tired. Adequate water can help you with joint pain and make you significantly less likely to get sick. So you see that just 2% decrease in lack of water, being dehydrated, just 2% affects where first? The brain. And why do you think that is? Because the body's about 60% or so of water, but the brain is about 73% water. And so that's one of the first places you're going to feel it, is in your brain. And we take this for granted. We think, oh, I can go without water. People live through it. But if we want optimal health, right? If we want to be happy people, like Chad just shared about the study of water drinkers, those that drink more are happier people. And so it's so important for our brains that we're getting plenty of water, because that's the first place you're going to feel it. It also lowers your blood pressure, elevates your mood, cleanses your liver, helps you with your weight, helps you with your body temperature, and helps with clarity of mind. And the question is, how much water should you drink? So there's this doctor at watercure.com, and he says that half your body weight in ounces, or if you go by milliliters, 33 milliliters per kilogram. So what is that? If you weigh 200 pounds, how many ounces of water should you be drinking? 100. Yep. So, but you have to understand, this doesn't, just because you see this formula doesn't mean like, okay, tomorrow go do this. All right? You should always work yourself up to things where you find your comfort, right? Because one person may not be as active as another. One may need less than this, and one may need more than this, depending on their activity. And you don't want to overdo it, because then you dilute your electrolytes, and then you get yourself into other trouble. So you're going to be very careful with that. So just work your way up until you start seeing the benefits. And another thing they recommend, those that have issues with salt, like you get low in your salt.
Which is very few people.
Which is very few people, but there are some folks out there that get low in their salt. Most people, if you're eating packaged foods, you're not going to have that trouble. But you do 1/4 teaspoon in a quart of water. So that's 1/4 teaspoon of salt in a quart of water, just to replenish your electrolytes. And that's somebody who's active, sweating it out like crazy, maybe even out, in the heat of the summer, and you don't want to deplete your electrolytes because you're drinking too much water without getting the salts back in.
Can I ask you a question
Yeah.
about iodine in salt? And what is it? We bought salt that's got iodine now because we've been using the Himalayan salt
Yes.
stuff.
So
You want me to talk about it quick?
Yeah, he can tell you that there is a problem today.
All right, so this kind of flies in the face of everything you'll hear on the internet, but if you look at the research, there is a potential that so Himalayan salt, and you have all these different varieties of salts out there, they often have different colors, and one of the reasons is sometimes it's simply minerals in there that are causing the colors, but they all have all kinds of minerals. They can also have things like radioactive elements mixed in there. Now, it's not that somebody stuck some radioactive elements in there. It's that it's a natural process in the earth. So some of them can actually have some toxicity to them. And so people say, well, don't eat the other kinds because they're dangerous. Well, here's the thing. If this is more anecdotal, but you look back historically in Europe, my grandfather used to live in Europe, and he said, you know, we used to see people with goiter all the time in Europe. Goiter, goiter, goiter. They'd have that goiter there. And he said, but you didn't see that in the United States. It just wasn't a thing because Americans took what kind of salt? Iodized salt. And he said, and we do see Americans not using the iodized salt anymore, and we're also seeing significantly more problems with thyroid. So it may be that we're actually getting back to the same problem these Europeans used to have because we're getting away from the iodized salt. Now, if you want to continue to use whatever variety of salt, you're absolutely welcome to. I'm not here to judge anybody, but it seems this is a potential factor that people may be getting back to having lower levels of
But if you do, try to
iodine.
find it in seaweed.
Yeah, there are other ways to get iodine. You can get it through things like seaweed, through kombu. That's one of the varieties of seaweed. But some of the seaweeds have massive quantities, like 3,000 times, or 3,000% rather, of the amount than you need in a day. So you can actually overdo it with the seaweed. So if you're going to even do the seaweed thing, don't overdo that. A little bit of something can go a long way, and that is the case with iodine. You don't need to overdo iodine.
Thank you.
Good question. Okay, so in terms of overcoming cravings, we have a few things that we encourage people to do right at the moment that you're feeling like, I gotta do this, I gotta say this, I feel like doing that. This is the time. Sorry, I'm really blowing that speaker out. This is the time that you need to try a few of these things. And one of them is drinking water. Water becomes your new best friend. It's with you all the time. And think about it, when you replace other drinks with water, it's that hand to mouth. You know, a lot of our addictions have to do with hand to mouth. So you're fixing that neurological, right? You're replacing it with something else. So that's a good thing. It's not just about getting rid of things, it's about replacing them with better things. And so if you can't drink water because it's tasteless to you, it's okay to put some lemon in it, as long as you don't ruin your teeth. You know, like just try it and see, and you can slowly, because some people's teeth are sensitive to lemon, so I'm just letting you know that.
You can always drink it through a straw too.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you, Sandra. So you could also drink it with a straw to get it past your teeth. Or you could just do water in the morning, or lemon water in the morning, and then wash it down with regular water, just depending. Because sometimes people struggle with water in the morning because it feels funny in the mouth. I don't know. But it's a good way to wake up, is rehydrating. And then the other thing is going for a walk. Walk. Let's say you're in a frustrating situation and you've been sitting for a while, and then you get into something and you're really frustrated. Get up and move and walk. And remove yourself from the situation that you have time to pray. And that's one of our other things that Chad will share in a minute. But first, Chad's going to share about how to breathe properly and have good posture.
All right. Now, this is quite simple. For those who can, stand up just for a moment with me.
Click forward.
And we're going to talk about breathing properly, or adequate inspirations of air, breathing accurately. And one of the ways to do it is, now for instance, if I'm like this, you know, if I'm hunched, it's harder to breathe properly, right? But when I have better posture, it's easier. So one of the ways you can find proper posture is to simply put your arms at your side, like this, and then just reach your arms straight up like you're doing a, what would we call the
Stretch.
snow angel or something like that, or jumping jacks. You don't need to jump up. And just by doing that, and then you can put your arms back down, and it will put you into a proper position of standing. You notice that?
Doesn't it feel like you're...
Yeah, and for some people it feels funny, like they're sticking their chest way out, but you're really not. It's actually just a simple way. You do the same thing when you're sitting. You don't have to do it right now, but just anytime you notice you're slouching, going back into a proper position can actually, that's another thing they found, simply asking people who are depressed to have better posture and always remind themselves to recorrect their posture when they start slouching, they actually become happier. It's, once again, doesn't just get rid of all depression, but it's another factor that can make you feel better. So you're welcome to sit back down. And and then also learning to, while you, even when you have proper posture, to learn to breathe adequately into your diaphragm. And you probably heard that if you've ever taken a choir class, they tell you to breathe into your diaphragm. And the way that you can find what your diaphragm feels like, I don't know if you can see me, but if I sit down and I put spread my legs apart just a little bit, and if I were to put my arms between my legs and then bend over and take a deep breath. If you try that, you could give that a try. Put your arms between your legs, bend over, and you'll feel, as you take a deep breath, it feels like you're breathing into your upper stomach. You feel that? That's your diaphragm. And so that's how you find your diaphragm. And just like a baby, when a baby breathes, it naturally, what goes up and down? Their little tummy typically goes up and down because they're breathing. We naturally breathe correctly. As we get old, sometimes as we get a little bigger, we get a gut and we suck it in and don't want to let anybody see it, and then we start breathing like, and we think, wow, that's really deep breathing. I can see your chest moving, but actually it's shallow breathing when we do that, right? So we want to learn to, like, your chest will still go out, but you want to feel it in the diaphragm also. So taking those,
stressed.
yeah. So when you're stressed, deep breaths, just 5-6 times back and forth, slow in breaths, slow out. Sometimes you can breathe in for 6 seconds, breathe out slowly for 6 seconds, go back and forth, 5, 6, 7 times, and often even that will just cause, if you have anxiety, to lower the anxiety levels.
The blood pressure.
Yeah.
I do it with the blood pressure cuff, and it brings my blood.
Yeah, well, Fadia says that you can even do it when you're taking your blood pressure. Doing that while you're taking your blood pressure, it will literally lower your blood pressure at that moment too. So that's one of the benefits to it, that it's lowering your blood pressure. You feel less stressed. And then out of these 3 things, drink water, going for a walk, how to overcome cravings, deep breathing, and number 4 is Bible promises and prayer. What it is that God has given us promises in His Word to help us in every situation we could go through. When we're stressed, when we have anxiety, when we're sick, when we're depressed, there's promises that actually can help us. And as we think about them, those things that we're thinking about and we pray about, thoughts work out actions. Repeated actions form habits, and habits form character. So it ends up changing our lives. Now, this next question is not for you to raise your hand, but if there's something in your life, is there anyone that has something in their life that they want to let go of? If they want to let go of something. Now that's an important thing to actually recognize. Yeah, I do have certain things in my life that could make me more unhappy. Maybe I'm addicted to something. Maybe this is making me more depressed. Well, okay, if I got something, I want to learn to let that go. And we're going to come back to that in just a moment. But we suggest never using the word failure. So let's say you're trying to overcome a bad habit. And so you go several hours and you fall back into it. You go several days or even weeks, and then you fall back into it. Sometimes we just beat ourselves up and, I'm a failure. I've tried over and over. I just can't do this. But no, you can say, okay, why did I stumble? Okay, well, I guess I went to the bar again, or whatever it is, or I was around a bunch of people smoking, and man, it was just such a temptation, so I had another cigarette, or whatever it is, or somebody's looking at something on the internet, pornography or whatever, and you were bored, and you all of a sudden you did something you shouldn't have. So why? You can actually learn from it, so that you don't just go, okay, well, I messed up or I failed. No, I can learn from this, and that can actually help you the next time you get in that very same situation. And Thomas Edison, it's said that he said, I know 999 ways not to make a light bulb. Well, you can interpret that in many different ways. Maybe, do you think he figured it out on his very first try? You think he was like one morning like, oh, I wonder, if I, did this and boom, it worked. He's like, wow, that was simple. I'm guessing he tried and tried and tried and things burned up and failed and, even thought at times maybe this is never going to work. But then he kept trying and trying and trying, and finally it worked. Just like me, I went through the 11 years of depression. I tried all different kinds of things. This doctor would share these different natural remedies. I tried this one and this one and this one and this one, and none of them worked. But I kept trying, and I'm glad I never gave up. Because what if I would have given up on the 10th one, but if I would have tried the 11th, I would have been healed. But I stopped at 10 because I was like, well, I've tried too many different things. I'm going to give up. My suggestion is never give up. Never give up. Because I'll give you an illustration. You may have heard this. There's a guy by the name of Doug Batchelor, and he had struggled with depression. His mom actually called him up. She was a very wealthy woman. I think she was like a news anchor. And she called him up and she said, I'm thinking of committing suicide. And he said to her, I've thought of doing it too. And she said, yeah. He said, no, then I thought about it. I've thought about doing it. And then I thought, sometimes you try new things in life. And sometimes you really like it. And sometimes you try other things and you're like, man, I didn't like that at all. He said, but then I thought, well, what if I do kill myself and then I didn't like it? He said, well, I thought, well, then I'll never get a chance to do that one again. And his mom said, you know what? That's a really good point. I'm not going to kill myself. And I say it's a little funny, but it's true. It is true, isn't it? And not only that, to give you evidence of this fact, you've probably heard the number one most popular place in America for people to kill themselves is anybody know? Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. Number one place. People walk out on the bridge and they take a jump off, and you think, well, it's water down below, but it's so high that when they hit the water, they generally break something, like they'll break their back from the smashing into the water so hard, and the water's very cold, so now you got a broken back, the water's super cold, you got this massive current, and so most people just die. But a few of them live. A few of the people live, but typically with pain for the rest of their lives from breaking their back and whatnot. And they've interviewed everyone that they can find that's lived through it. And they asked them the same question. They said, did you regret jumping? Every single one of them had the same answer. Yes. And then they asked them a second question. When did you regret it? They said, the second I jumped. The second I jumped. Immediately they jump out and oh no, I made the wrong decision. So I say that saying, don't ever give up. Because you wouldn't like it if you did it, if you could get it back. And I don't say that to be funny or put anybody down. I just say, don't give up. There's people that love you, there's people that care for you, and even if you don't know a human that cares for you, there is a God that loves you. God loves you even if you don't know it. And so, the Bible says in Proverbs chapter 24, verse 16, for a just man, a good man, he falls 7 times. And what does he do after that? He rises up again. But the wicked shall fall into mischief. Meaning, the Bible says a just man compared to an unfaithful man, the difference between them is not that one falls and the other doesn't. Actually, they both fall. Everybody falls in life. But a just man always does what after he falls? He gets back up. When we fall over and over and over, the devil kind of may tell you, like, don't even try again. Just give up. There's no point in trying. He's trying to keep you down. But God wants to reach out just like he did to people in the Bible. He takes people by the hand. He lifts them up. And he helps people that cannot walk, people who are paralyzed. He takes them by the hand and makes them enabled to do the impossible. And Jesus can do the impossible in our lives. He can do the impossible in our lives. And the Bible says in Philippians 4:13, many of you probably have this memorized, it says that I can do what? All things through Christ which strengthens me. He can give me the victory. And I'm so thankful that God gave me the victory over depression. I've been happier ever since then. It's changed my life. And if I wanted to be depressed again, I don't know who would want to, but if I wanted to, I actually could. I could go back to the lifestyle that made me depressed, and I could be depressed today. But I haven't chosen to do that because I found the way of joy and happiness in my life, and I choose to walk in that path and to not go back, and I can do all things through Christ which strengthens me. Now, talking about addictions, did you know what the most significant, I was just read a couple books by, one of them was a medical doctor talking about dopamine. I shared last time I was here in the area a session on dopamine, and I'm not going to go into that now, but the number one risk factor for for addiction or dependence upon something, and this is kind of obvious, but I didn't think about it, the number one risk factor for addiction is access to the agent that makes you addicted. The number one risk factor for addiction is access to that thing that makes you addicted. So for instance, there's this idea, like for instance, you may have heard that in places like either Seattle or Portland, Oregon, they decided, hey, what if we just make it like we won't arrest anybody for drugs. So you can just have drugs on you, no problem. We'll give them full-on access, and we'll even give them needles. And they thought maybe it'll cause less problems with drugs. Do you think did it work well? It's been very successful, right? You're seeing almost no one on the streets doing drugs now, though, those areas. Is that true? No, it's been an absolute explosion of people living on the street doing drugs. Because access is the number one risk factor for addiction. You follow? When you make a drug illegal that was illegal, people who wouldn't have done it because it's illegal will do it because it's legal, and that will make more people prone to addiction. So we are creating, and I'm not here judging anybody. I think some of these people probably had good motives. They actually thought maybe it would work, but we know the answer now. We know that it's not working. We're seeing just massive problems. I mean, you look at places like San Francisco, a once beautiful city, is just a haven of drugs today, right? I mean, it is, just drugs and things all over the place, but access is the number one factor. And so one of the things I would suggest is if you are struggling with an addiction to whether it's a substance like a drug or alcohol or tobacco or whatever it is, or maybe it's food, you can't get rid of all food, right? You can't go like, well, I struggle with addiction to food. I'm just not going to eat anymore. Well, you can do that for a little while, but that's only going to last so long, and then you die. But you can restrict access to what food? Bad food, right? The things that make you addicted, right? Junk food or things with all kinds of chemicals in it, like MSG, that for those of us, like I would be an obese type 2 diabetic if I hadn't learned, like that's my background. But learning to eat healthy, I realize that certain foods I'm absolutely addicted to, so we just don't bring those in the house. And I don't have to eat them. It's not very tempting if they're not in the home, right? But if I had them in the cupboard and I'm like, well, I'll just have them there just in case, right? It's that access that makes those of us like myself. Some of you have phenomenal willpower. You can have some junk food in the house. And I had a friend, if I had a bag of like M&Ms as a kid, I opened the bag and what would I do? You eat the whole bag. If I had a friend, he would have a bag of M&Ms, he would have it on his steps because he is the only one upstairs. He would go by and he would eat 1 or 2 M&Ms. I didn't even know that was a thing because I ate everything that would be with me, right? Like I would just eat and eat and eat until it was gone, right? And some of you are more temperate than me, and so, you can handle a little bit of something that someone like me has to be more careful with. But each of us has to make our own decisions. I'm not here to judge you how you live your life. That's not my point. But if you're addicted to things like I have been, avoiding access to them is a good way to do it. Just actually not have them in the home. And so we're going to close tonight with a challenge. And it's from some interesting research that's been done. Dr. John J. Rady, in his fascinating book, Sparked the Revolutionary New Science of Exercise and the Brain, shares research on exercise's ability to enhance your focus, helps you pay better attention, and even makes you happier. Exercise can also prime the brain to develop new brain cells in the hippocampus, which is one of the memory centers, one of the main memory centers of the brain, and even help your memory, right?
Historically, they said you couldn't.
Yes, you probably heard historically that, you have all your brain cells when you're born, but the research seems to be saying that you actually, now not all of the brain can, but specifically potentially the hippocampus may be able to regenerate brain cells. And exercise is one of the potential ways to do that. So if you can't exercise, that is one of the very important things to do. So 2 simple things in the challenge. I would challenge you to, if you can, get some exercise, even if it's as simple as, I'll give you, for those of us who, they found that, for instance, This is a fascinating study they did, which isn't that old. When you're sitting down just like you are, I'm not saying you need to do this the whole time I'm talking, but they found for people with blood sugar issues, just doing this, like lifting up your heel like this while you're sitting, it can significantly, there's a muscle, is it psoas? No. Psoas muscle, is that right? Anybody taking oh, that's up there. Okay, there's one in here, shame on me, I should know the name of it. It doesn't matter, but basically what they found out, specifically for some reason, this particular motion will burn up a lot of your free blood sugar. So after a meal, if you're on a plane or you're in a car or you're in a situation where you can't exercise, even just doing these toe raisers while you're sitting there in a chair can significantly lower your blood sugar so you don't have as high of a blood sugar spike. So even if you can't exercise, but if you have enough strength to even do something very small like this, you still could be doing something. Obviously, for those of you who are in better shape, a good brisk walk. Some of you may need even more, like a jog or a run, or lifting weights or what have you. Or if you live out in the country, like many of us that are here do, when I'm home, I don't need to really be doing much exercise because I'm doing tons of it working on the homestead. So that's just part of life by nature. But if you don't have something like that, trying to get whatever kind of exercise will work for your body is an important thing to do for your physical health, but also your mental health. One of the biggest factors in depression is exercise. That is one of the most important factors, and we'll talk maybe some more about that later. But also the other one is, if you don't drink any water, or you drink just juice or beer or alcohol or soda or whatever, I would challenge you to begin to drink water and replace the other things in your life with good, fresh water. There's nothing better for your health. And so we're going to be back tomorrow, and we're going to be going deeper into things. Today was just like a little foundation, just a few little tidbits, a little nuggets that can be helpful for the brain. But we're going to really get into more detail in overcoming bad habits, but also things that can make you healthier, happier, and just make you also someone who can help other people more. Because once you know some of these things, you can also share it with a friend. Yes?
There was talking back to the shrinking of the brain from alcohol, drugs, whatever.
Yes.
This morning on one of the national news, whichever one, NBC or whatever, they talked about lack of socializing with others causing shrinkage of the brain. People being hermits or whatever, or hermiting, that also, just lack of social interaction also shrinks the brain.
Yes, and I'll share it just because we're for the recording, since those that is very true, that social isolation is one of the greatest risk. It actually can be as bad as like smoking for you. Social isolation. So talking with people, communicating with people, even when you don't feel like it. Even if you have social anxiety. When I was depressed, I had social anxiety. It stressed me out so much to talk to people. It would, and the thing is, I was traveling the world speaking. So imagine you have to get up in front of people and you're horrified of public speaking. And then you have social anxiety, and so talking with them after is just so difficult. And I went through that for years, and I shared with you that we do seminars on the gut brain. When my gut healed, my depression went away and my social anxiety went away. Now I can spend time with people all day, every day, and it doesn't stress me out at all. At the end of the day, I'm totally fine with it. It used to feel like I just want to get away. I just want to run off into the woods and not be with anybody. But I don't feel that way anymore. Although I do love being in the woods, and I don't mind being alone, but I don't feel this rush to be alone. I don't. And so, yeah, God can help you overcome. Yes?
I was just wondering, every now and then I see an ad about making you a genius, like in 26 days. Like, and who's promoting that is a Seventh-day Adventist. A surgeon, Ben Carson.
Okay, I have not heard anything about that.
You haven't heard about it?
No, not a thing about it.
Nobody says anything about it. And what's going on here?
I have not heard anything about that. I have heard. I read a book by him years ago, and but no, I haven't heard anything about that. But I'll have to look into that. Thank you. I know he talks about one thing. It's just kind of a tangential to that. Is that he talks about children. Children, when they are young, naturally are extremely creative. It's natural for little children to be creative, But then through things like television and our school system, it pretty much sucks the creativity out of most children. And so that is one thing that we lose by our standard. Our educational system isn't made for you to think, it's made for you to repeat back what somebody else wants you to think, right? So we call things like critical thinking, and then it will ask you a question as if, but they already know what they want you to say. They're not actually getting you to critically analyze, they're getting you to repeat what they think you should say. But yeah, so one of the aspects of being intelligent is having creativity, and so actually encouraging that in a child is a beneficial thing. Did I see another hand raised or no?